Please welcome Stormy Peters.
Good afternoon, universe. I hope you had an awesome day and saw lots of awesome software. I'm about to introduce you to 3 developers who are changing the world of software development. As you all know, we're demanding a lot more of our software. We have software that can go to Mars, we can have software that can drive cars, and as we saw this morning, we have software that can write software. On the other hand, the world of software development is getting a lot more complicated. Our developers are using, when they write new software, 90% of it is pre-existing open source software that they have to figure out how to integrate. The speakers I'm about to introduce you to are helping solve that problem. They're making it easier for developers. Because what I love about developers, and what I love even more about open source software developers, and what I love about the developers I'm going to introduce you to, is that when they see a problem, they write some code and they fix it. A secret I have is if you have a really boring problem, a really gnarly problem, you just assign a software developer to it, and they'll write some software and it will go away. So the 3 speakers that I'm going to introduce you to are writing software to make problems go away, but they're also figuring out ways to do this in ways that are financially viable. So they're figuring out how to solve the world's problem with software and making a living off of it, which is a fascinating problem that will change the world. To introduce the first speaker, I have to tell you about a story that inspired me early in my career. I was at an open source conference about 20 years ago, one of the very first open source software conferences, and I was sitting in the audience. I still remember exactly where I was sitting. It was kind of back in that area. And this keynote speaker was talking, and he worked for a newspaper in Kansas, which is in the Midwest of the United States, if you're not from here. And he was talking about how he didn't have enough journalists to send out to cover all the stories that his readers wanted to hear about. So he wanted to cover Little League games, but he didn't have a reporter that could go to every Little League game and report back on the game. So they decided to crowdsource the data gathering, and they would have the grandparents and the parents send in text messages about the plays that their kids and grandkids were making. And then they wrote software, open source software, to collect all of that data, and then the journalists could write a story about it. The first speaker I'm going to introduce is one of the co-founders of that software, which is called Django. He's still working on problems like that. He now works on large data sets. So if you are not a software developer or a data analyst, and you download 100,000 or 200,000 pieces of data to tell your story, if you're a journalist, how do you do that without becoming a software developer? So he is writing software to help them do that today. What he's here to talk to you about today is how he's doing that and making a living off of it. So how we can all write open source software in a financially viable way. So please join me in welcoming Simon Willison to the stage.
Okay. Hey, everyone. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the single hardest problem in all of open source, which is, as independent open source developers, if we're giving this stuff away, how do we make a living? How do we make money out of this? And they've given me, I think, 10 minutes, so we can solve that in 10 minutes. Let's get this all sorted out. My open source project, and I think the key thing here is that we need to tackle this problem from 2 sides. You know, as maintainers of software, we need to figure out how to make this stuff work financially. But also as users of software, we're really invested in solving this problem too, right? If you depend on open source software, you kind of need that thing to keep on working for you. You need that to be maintained long into the future. So I want to think about this from both sides of the problem. My open source software is a thing called Datasette. I've been working on this for about 6 years now. And it's actually a whole ecosystem of tools around this theme of helping people explore, analyze, and then publish their data. So Datasette itself is a Python web application that you can pour data into. You get data in a SQLite database, and then it can visualize it on maps and give people interfaces for exploring it. And crucially, it helps you publish it online. My inspiration here is WordPress, right? If you want to publish content, WordPress has mechanisms for doing that. I'm trying to build WordPress, but for data itself, for structured data, and for getting that online. And the idea for this actually came from work I used to do at the Guardian newspaper back in London, where we were publishing data-driven stories, and we wanted to put out the data behind those stories as well. And back then, we figured the easiest way to do that would be to have a blog. So we built the Guardian data blog, and we'd publish a story that was driven by data reporting, and then we'd put up the data in a Google spreadsheet. We'd publish Google spreadsheets with data that underlay our stories. I always felt like there should be a better way of doing that. There should be some kind of mechanism that was more open and powerful and flexible than just sticking things in a spreadsheet. And so I worked on Datasette as a side project for a couple of years, and then I built a feature which really sort of blew the whole thing open. I added plugin support, again, inspired by WordPress, and now Datasette has over 128 plugins that let it do all sorts of additional things. And I've realized that in terms of open source contribution, plugins are absolutely the best model for this, because I can wake up in the morning and my software developed a new feature and it was released to the world and I didn't even have to review a pull request. It is so liberating to have this as a mechanism for extending software. I'd thoroughly recommend people look at plugin systems if you're feeling overwhelmed by all of the contributions that people might be trying to make. So I was building this originally as a side project, and I quickly realized, especially with the plugins mechanism, that this was going to be something I want to work on for the next 10, 20 years of my life. That's never happened to me before in my career. I'm very easily distracted. You don't get a project very often where you think, you know what, if I was working on this in 10 years' time, I'd still be excited about it. This project, it's absolutely that. So I've got two goals here. Firstly, I want to be able to support myself. I would like to continue to work on this for the next decade plus. But I also realized that working on this kind of thing solo is kind of lonely. I want a team. And this is super useful as a psychological trick for me because I'm not a natural capitalist. You know, I'm very much a sort of open source engineer. Thinking in terms of paying for a team helps me elevate my financial goals and say, okay, I'm going to have to make some serious revenue from this thing if I'm going to achieve these dreams. So I've had a few sort of lucky kind of unconventional ways of supporting this project so far. I started it as a side project, and then I heard about this program at Stanford University, a journalism fellowship program called JSK, where they pluck sort of 20 journalists from around the world and pay them to spend a year on campus at Stanford working on problems that are relevant to the world of journalism. It's beautifully vague sort of specification. And I applied saying, you know, I'm not actually a journalist, but I write tools for journalists. Is that going to count? And they decided it did. So I got paid to spend a year working on my open source projects, which with hindsight, completely ruined me, because once you've got to spend a year just working on the things you want to work on, it's very difficult to accept somebody else stepping in and saying, okay, now you need to work on these other things instead. So since that fellowship ended, I've basically been living off savings and occasionally picking up bits of consulting work and trying to keep that ball rolling because I'm enjoying myself so much. I had another lucky break earlier this year. I was accepted into the GitHub Accelerator program. This was a program from GitHub where they take, again, a dozen or so open source projects, and they pay the maintainers to work on them full-time for 10 weeks, while also focusing on solving this larger problem. How can we make this stuff financially sustainable? So we were talking to each other, but they also brought in invited speakers from projects that had made this stuff work. And the themes that started to emerge from there were kind of fascinating. It turns out the sponsorship thing, you can make it work. If your project is widely enough used, you can have enough sponsorship to sustain it. But it's actually become something of a sort of marketing and sales job. The sponsorship management, like keeping your sponsors happy, becomes a very crucial part of making that work. There was the idea, an interesting idea that came up was, again, if your project is successful, somebody is going to make a bunch of money selling courses and tutorials and books about it, and you know your project better than anyone else, so maybe that person should be you. So there are projects that have actually made that work. Sort of the content side of it is what drives the revenue for the project. There's a classic solution, which is hosting it for people. And this, WordPress have done this, and MongoDB have done this. It's a well-trodden path for open source, for building a business around an open source project. And then the last one was this enterprise licensing. You know, the free version has a bunch of features, but then you offer an enterprise licensed version with different licensing terms and like commercial support and maybe a few sort of enterprise-friendly features. And we heard about that one from Mike Perham from the Sidekick Ruby message queue project, who has had fantastic success with this. And he very specifically warned us. He said, whatever you do, don't do the hosted version. As a solo developer, you do not want to touch this because now you're responsible for customer data. If something breaks, you have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix it. It is by far the worst option. So I carefully considered all of these options, and I've decided to go for that hosted option. I'm doing the thing that Mike Perrin said, do not do under any circumstances. And I should justify that a little bit. A problem I'm having with my software is my initial audience are journalists. I want journalists to use this to help with their reporting. And if you tell a journalist, oh, it's easy, all you have to do is spin up a Linux server, pip install Datasette, set up systemd, and then open it up to the internet, you've just lost 98% of your target audience there. So I feel like I'm getting sort of two things at once here. I'm getting a business model that has been demonstrated to work, and I'm also solving the problem that really my target audience need to click a button and start using that software. And this is where my sort of last unconventional form of support came from. I've been building this on a hosting platform called fly.io, which is absolutely perfect for this kind of project because they make it very easy to spin up secure containers for individual customers, so I can run copies of my software independently for everyone. And they've actually been sponsoring the project by funding a freelance developer to work with me on getting this stuff working, which they agreed to because we're working on open source, we're working in public, and if we can get this working, it becomes a great case study for them in how you can solve these kinds of problems on top of their platform. So if you're a company looking to sponsor an open source project, paying for freelancers to work on things is an incredibly generous and very effective way of providing that support. But I wanted to bring it back to this idea of how can we tackle this problem from two directions? Like, what can we as users of open source be doing to help push money towards the projects that we care about? And I've got a proposal for you. I have a bit of a conspiracy that we can all get in on here. What you should be doing is paying maintainers to speak to your team. What I mean by this is that maintainers are very busy people. I don't have time to do sort of very hands-on consulting with people, but I can spare an hour out of my day to jump on a Zoom call. And I've done a few of these, and they're absolutely fantastic as a way of having a sort of time-boxed commitment where I can earn some money doing something genuinely useful, talking to people about what I've done. And it's a great trick for us because, as I sort of mentioned earlier, engineers aren't great. They're great at writing code. We're not great at asking for money. But with this, you don't need the engineers to ask. You can push money towards people. You can get in touch with the maintainers of the software you're using and say, hey, we'd love to know more about this. We will pay you to jump on a Zoom call with our team and answer questions and talk about what you're doing. So really, this is a sort of call to action. If you've got projects that you depend on and you want to support them, try this sort of sneaky backhand way of funneling money there. Every company has a training budget. Companies are very bad at just giving money away, but they're really good at hiring consultants. So if you can shape this as a consultancy agreement to just get one of these maintainers to do that sort of hour-long call with you, I think that could work really well. So yeah, please go ahead and work on this from the other side. Help us figure out this problem by finding ways to shovel money towards those projects that you depend on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. I bet Simon didn't tell you that this morning on this very stage, he accepted an open source award on behalf of the Python Software Foundation that he's on the board of. So our next speaker is also a developer, and she started a company to solve the problem that she saw. She saw it in her very first job as a software developer. How many of you have started a job, and on day one, they show you the code base, and you log in, and you're like, where do I start? Or perhaps you've done that with an open source software project. You want to help, you log in, you take a look at it. Surely there's a bug in there somewhere you can fix, and it's a whole lot of files linked together in some random way. So what Shanea did with her co-founder is write a piece of software that helps you visualize how all of those libraries, all of those dependencies that you have, how all of your code interacts together so that when you make a change, you can see what's going to be affected. So it's useful when starting a new job. It's also useful if your coworker leaves and you suddenly have to inherit all of the code that they've been writing and supporting. So it's been useful to open source software projects, and it's been useful to companies in helping them onboard new people and maintain the software that they have and make it reliable. She's going to talk to you about some of the ways that you can make your code easier to learn and easier to maintain. So please join me in welcoming Shanea Leven.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Shanea Leven, CEO of Cozy. I've been in dev tools for about 10 years, and some of the best developer tools companies in the world. And one thing that has always completely sucked was getting into flow state. But, why is that? So, has this ever happened to you? You started a new company, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you're ready to ship some code. But then you're hit with this mountain of code. Or you're working on a project, and then you realize the person who knows about that area of the code that you need is on vacation. Or, maybe you had an experience like I did, and your company went through a massive layoff, and you're trying to get code out the door, but 2 days before the launch, there is this huge bug. And the people who know that area of the code base are unfortunately no longer around. And you get out of flow state. You get interrupted. And yes, we can talk about people and pings and general well-being, like hunger that interrupt your flow. But if we take a step back, what really gets us out of flow state? We don't understand or have clarity around how our code bases work. And that's not a reflection on us as developers, but just the nature of how our code works, the tools that we've been provided, and our company's willingness to invest in your developer experience. And so this is what I want to talk to you about today. How can you stay in the flow state by understanding your code base on a day-to-day basis, no matter the situation? So, if the culprit is we don't understand our code bases, why is understanding a code base so hard? In general, code base knowledge is broken up into 3 major but really complex parts. The code system, working with the code, or just the reality of being a human being. And so when I mean working with the code or the system, what I mean is how the code is actually connected. What are the execution paths? What are the function calls that call other functions? What is the high-level architecture? What are all of the domain objects? We also need to understand how to work with the code, like work with the team as well. What's the code review process, design patterns, testing patterns, gotchas in the code, deployment processes, all of those things. Then there's just the reality of being a human being. And as developers, our main goal is not to ship things, and not just to write everything down. Not writing things down, or just quickly gets out of date as soon as you're ready to update it. And the reality of being a human being, repetition, you actually only retain about 30% of what you're told. Also, we have these massive systems that are literally continuously changing. So while you're trying to understand your code base, your teammates are shipping code still. It's literally changing from under you. And finally, turns out the way that we learn code hasn't actually changed in 50 years. The process of reading and understanding code is inefficient. So we read code 1 line at a time, and we imagine how our systems work. There's very little to help us make sense of the code. The data is abstracted with types, or it's completely missing when it's untyped. Reading is the most manual way to extract information out of code. But reading and understanding is at least 50% of the job between onboarding, debugging, code reviews, feature work, incidents, all of those things. So what happens when you hit one of these blocks? You must stop and go and find the answers. And that is how you get out of flow state. You can turn off Slacks and emails, you can avoid meetings, you can have a fridge next to your desk, but this will make you stop every single time. And the kicker is we actually need to get ahead of this, because as you've probably heard all day today, we haven't changed this code in the way this problem works in 50 years, but AI is now writing our code. So if we don't understand the code that humans write, we for sure won't understand the code that AI writes. So we need to arm ourselves with ways to understand an entire code base like yesterday. So what do we do to understand our code and stay in the flow state? 1, we need to make onboarding a priority. 2, add self-documenting documentation. And third, come up with a system that helps you load things into your head fast. So first, make onboarding a priority at your company. Taking the time when you are new to an area of the code or new to that company to go deep helps you load up all of the code in your head, and you basically write things down as you go. You start small in scope and then expand strategically. Provide small, early wins. Add self-updating documentation. You might be saying, isn't this what docs are for? But you and I both know that traditional documentation is flawed for all of the reasons that, everybody talks about. We hate writing it. It's out of date faster than we can update it. It's not linked to the code, so you still need to go find the code either way. And you need to understand your code quickly. Find patterns to be able to understand these things. What are all of the domain objects, users? What are the key flows? How do you make sure you draw out the architecture? You can start by key flows and then expanding out, taking into account all of the main components and how they talk to each other. Make sure when you're doing this, you get your system in, you can understand what's responsible for each. Then, once you've got all of this, make sure you ask a teammate if they're still around to just level set. Also, take time to understand things at the low level, the frameworks. So don't just understand React. Really take a deep dive and say, how do I understand React, Redux, query, functional components, React testing library? By going through basic tutorials and guides, make sure that you know how to use the tools that you're using so that you have a basis to operate on top of. Next, understand your team's coding patterns. What patterns are encouraged, and more importantly, which ones are discouraged? You can look at recent code reviews to see how things are being done most recently. And then when you're working on that task and reach a decision point, just double check with a teammate that that pattern that they like to use is being used the way that they want. And then before it's done, make sure you get a code review. Make sure you also learn the development process. We all kind of know this, but it's really good to be able to say, make sure you know how do we commit, do code reviews, deploys, plans, give status updates. How do we retro? Also, keep a lookout for code-based tribal knowledge. If you make a change here, you also need to make sure you make a change over there. Don't touch this function because it's going to degrade performance or create an incident. We want to look out for those. Of course, write everything down because you're absolutely going to forget. Take notes, draw diagrams, add comments to code. Try to be a good citizen and update the docs if you can. But you're probably sensing a problem, that this is going to take you something that you probably don't have, which is time. You might have a deadline, or again, your company might have gone through some restructuring changes, and now you have more work than you can handle and possibly the same deadlines. There are tools for diagrams. There are tools for notes, there are tools for reading code, but they're all separate. And this still gets out of date because they aren't connected to the main thing that you're trying to learn, which is your code. So why do we have to draw out our key flows by hand when the computer literally already knows how our code runs? What if we can continuously understand our code? What if all of the key flows were drawn out for you? What if you could just start from a single function and then traverse until you understood the entire architecture? What if on every PR you could understand the impact that that code change has on the rest of the architecture? And this is the thing that we're building at Codecy. You can use Codecy as a replacement for all of this unnecessary stuff. So what can companies do to help their developers stay in flow state and ship more code? Invest in the tools that enhance the developer experience. Provide them with tools to make wading through all of this crazy, ridiculous information easy and accessible, particularly when you have AI-generated code tools. GitHub has invested in the tools that help code understanding, and we're a GitHub fund investment because they're a forward-thinking company who understands the future. They see the value in getting tools that help developers understand their code quickly and enhance our entire experience. So if you're at a company that makes it better to be able to help the developer experience, make sure that you are like GitHub. And with that, I want to make sure everyone has a great experience. So this QR code will give you a 30% off for CodeSeed to make sure that you're part of our exclusive GitHub Universe VIP program. And I want to thank you to you and all of GitHub for having us. Thank you.
So I bet what Shanea didn't tell you is that she has raised $10 million for her company to help bring this solution to the world. So our next speaker also encountered a problem in his very first job. I'm going to let him tell you the story, but it had something to do with like a floppy disk and running between floors in order to sync up development environments and production environments. What's amazing about the story is that he decided to solve it with software. He went on to co-found a project called Nix, and 1,500 developers have joined him in that project. So not only did he see a problem, he co-founded an open source software project to solve it, and lots of other people saw the problem and wanted to come help solve it as well. So Nix has now been on the top 10 list of GitHub projects by number of contributors for the past 2 years. He's now taken that idea and started a company called Phlox, which is bringing the concept of Nix to development environments and production environments. He has successfully raised $27 million to do that, and he's going to tell you his journey. So please join me in welcoming Ron Efroni to the stage.
Hey, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I put a picture of myself for a little quick two-factor authentication, so that's me. I'm here. Real quick, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Phlox, and I'm also one of the board members of the NixOS Foundation. And we're talking about startup journeys, but really, no startup journey ever is just one person standing in front of you on a stage. So for me, obviously, none of this would have been possible without my brilliant wife, with infinite patience across doing startups and open source, which I think a lot of you can relate to. Not an easy task to go under. And also our newest addition to the family, Baka. So really quickly about Phlox before we dive in. We're a 2-year-old company. We're completely distributed across everywhere, literally. And we practically live on GitHub because of that. And we're also part of GitHub for Startups, which is an amazing program. And today, I'm here to talk to you about the journey that took me into realizing that software development is kind of broken for us. And we really need to go into the core layers of it and see what we can do to solve it in order to keep us, the developers, keeping passionate and fun about what we're doing. So for me, this whole journey started when I was, as she mentioned, running around with a disk trying to copy files from one station to a different station in the Israeli Defense Forces when I first started my software engineering career. And the exact moment where I understood that we needed to solve something actually happened about 10 years later when I was heading developer products at Facebook. There, I remember that we wanted to change local development. We wanted to infuse it with remote development capabilities. And therefore, to start off that rather ambitious project, we actually sat down and drew out an entire diagram of what the software developer flow was. And I remember sitting in that room, and we were drawing nice circles and triangles and squares, but it became long, and that diagram went on and on and on. Kind of similar to this video, if everyone has ever seen it, that was my face, because when you looked at each node in our diagram, it made complete sense. It was a solution to a problem. But when I took a step back, it felt monstrous, and I was quite in disbelief to this is what it means to develop software today. Right? We've lost the simplicity of taking ones and zeros and turning them into magical things on our computer. And about at that time, I was actually coincidentally connected with my co-founder and CTO today, Michael, who, via a mutual friend, found out that we were grappling with the same problem and actually looking for the same solution, but in completely different industries. Michael was leading build and release engineering at the oldest and largest quant fund out of New York, D.E. Shaw, while I was trying to make developers just spin out super fast features and enable them and empower them to fail fast at Facebook. Never in my life would I have believed that we would be working on the same problems together, but to me, it just exemplified that this is a problem that's affecting a lot of different people. And that's where we hit the ground running, and we realized that there was a solution out there. Michael actually started working on this before I did, and that solution was an open source technology called Nix. And that technology was bringing in the things that we needed at the core level principle, unraveling what it means to develop software, going back to that first base, and bringing in a new principle that can help us build software with everything that we know about it today. And Nix ended up being our peanut butter cup. Not only was it the technical solution by providing a faster and more secure developer experience for us, but it was also bringing more than just Michael and I together. Now, real quick, what is Nix? Nix is one of the largest open source package repositories with over 80,000 packages. It is also a programming language and an operating system. And it's also an insanely huge community that is super famous for getting quite controversial on Hacker News, so I highly recommend you go check it out. But back to the scheduled programming, Nix and the community was doing so much more than bringing the Michaels and Rons of the world together. It was bringing so many people to that common problem of realizing that software complexity has reached a point that it's about time that we circled back and thought for a minute, how do we build software with what we know about it today? And that exact point was the reason we started Phlox. To bring these powers of Nix, these principles, to as many people in the world, to support this thriving and growing community so it can become a household name for anyone that's interested to contribute, and to bring it also into the enterprise landscape. And we started off by first creating a mutual core layer for every developer to work on, which ended up being a shared environment that can span projects, platforms, and time. And we can use it for almost everything and anything, but we can use it together. Now, that was quite an ambitious goal for us. It's quite a hard challenge because this is actually being felt by everyone. Well, at least we perceived so. And this is a problem that we called the squeeze, because that's what I feel as a developer that I'm experiencing when I'm going out there and I'm trying to write code. Industry forces, because of the complexity, are pushing on us from the left and from the right. On the left, we have things like the complexity of our software code bases. I mean, our software supply chain is getting pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, when's the last time you ran Yarn? How many modules did it spin out at you? What happens when machine learning generated code overcomes human generated code? I mean, we can barely understand our own code, right? And on the right, we have industry forces pushing in on us, and they're saying things like, well, you have to apply security and compliance practices. You have to apply to our user base who's expecting better, faster features in less time. And at the end of the day, the developer sits right in the middle. And what do we want? Well, we just want to go fast. We do understand that we need to go carefully when we're developing, but we also want to just have a happy life. And the way we see this afflicting our developer workload is it's really becoming unbalanced. Because of that, again, core complexity that software has grown into, and it's just getting more complex every day. In the past, where we were able to focus on just shipping the new features and not doing much around it, that's not there anymore. Today, we have to focus and think about, well, does it work on my machine? What about the CVEs? Instead of focusing on innovating, writing great code, or just checking out the latest tools and technologies and applying it to what we're working on, right? To me, it kind of feels like playing defense on your favorite sports game rather than playing offense, and that's kind of a bummer. So what are we even thinking about, right? Nix, Flux, everything that we're talking about, it's pretty high level, and I do want to keep it high level because I hope that folks don't walk away with, hey, we need to use Nix and Flux, but walk away with more of a concept of how we should evaluate anything that we're building, whether it's tomorrow, in 2 hours, or in a month. Right? The way we view it is that we should be looking at things under a build-first mentality, kind of like when you're cooking something in the kitchen. Right? I mean, yeah, you can just throw the pan on and start scrambling, but is that fun? Probably not. We're not going to get what we want. But if we go out, chop our onions, put them in a small bowl, the peppers, the spices are all set up perfectly, which I never do, it's going to be much easier for us to go through that cooking experience, much like developing code, developing our builds. And we found that to be the common layer that we need to have out there in order to span that complexity that we have grown into. Now, I've had a great time being on stage here. I mean, wrapping up the first day, huge honor. And the only points I kind of want to leave with are 3. One, I would love for folks to kind of go back and dig into what it means to be declarative, or what it means to be based on declarative platforms, right? It could be Nix, it could be Flux, that would be really great, but there's a lot out there. Right? Think about the complexity that we've reached and what we can do with it. The second thing is actually thinking about repeatability. What does it mean to build code, build software, build platforms that can be run again, whether it's next week, whether it's with my peer, because we need to collaborate, we need to share. That's the beauty of open source. And how can we do that? And the last thing, which sadly I didn't have enough time to talk about, and I have a lot of thoughts on, is can we find more places to collapse the stack? Going back to that diagram from left to right in complexity, it also kind of feels like we've added layer upon layer upon layer of solutions, but that also has created complexity. Can we start figuring out things that minimize it and allow us, the developers and our developers, to really hone in on what we want to do? So if anyone's interested, I'm going to be wearing a purple shirt tomorrow as well. Happy to talk to you all. Happy to talk about Nix, Flux development and where we think it's going. Really excited to be here. Thank you all for taking the time. I hope you had a great first day, and thank you.
So I already told you that Ron raised $27 million. I already told you he has a super successful open source software project with 1,500 contributors. I did hear a rumor that he has an actual real live puppy here at the conference. I haven't seen it yet. So I have a challenge for all of you. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to go start an open source software project that solves a big developer problem and raise millions of dollars. But if you do that, I would love to introduce you here next year. So if you have that idea, I'd love to hear it, love to introduce you. But my challenge for each of you is to help inspire the next open source software project that helps take software to the next level. And you can start doing that tonight at whatever party you end up at or whatever bar you end up at, or tomorrow during the conference. And the way you can do that is talk to the person next to you. Ask them what they're working on. Ask them what great ideas they have. And help them out. Maybe you help them out just by listening to them. Maybe you talk it through. Maybe if they've started an open source software project, you go drop a star on it. Maybe if they signed up for GitHub sponsors, you donate a little money. Maybe you review their documentation. But help inspire the next awesome project by being part of it. So my challenge to you is talk to the person next to you, have fun tonight, and enjoy tomorrow.